good morning. So we're here at Race City Flight Operations, Aiden and Instructor Patrick, student Aiden and Instructor Patrick, and we are going to go over a flight plan cross country. So let's take a look here. Our cross country will be to Asheville. Our mission here, Aiden, is we are going to bring an airplane up to Asheville, and then we're going to land at the FBO, and we brought our lunch so that we don't have to go anywhere, and that is why the back seat of our airplane, we've got a little bit of weight. We will have a little bit of weight there as well. So let's take a look, and this will be a complete flight plan from how to get from Lake Norman up to Asheville and how to find out all the information that you will need for this flight. So let's start with number one is just an overall, let's take a look at our section. Okay, so if you can see in the video here, Aiden has a sectional in front of him. And so the first step here is we are going to find Lake Norman. That always helps. Why don't we find Lake Norman? Okay, and for everyone watching along here on the video, we have Lake Norman right here. 14 alpha, it's 839 feet. All that information is in the block here. You've already been through our ground school. You already know how to read that sectional. And then, Aiden, how do we find Asheville? Yeah. So Asheville is over here in the North Carolina mountains in the western part of the state. And as some folks said this weekend when we were wrapping up our ground school, it is a bow tie, or what I really liked was a Tootsie Roll. There you go. We found the Tootsie Roll there, and the information for the Asheville Regional Airport is here in the blue text. Why is it blue, Aiden? It's a control tower. So the airport is blue, it has a control tower, and the text along with that will also be in blue, as opposed to Lake Norman where it's in magenta because we're uncontrolled. So, Aiden, why don't you draw a line using your plotter from Lake Norman to Asheville, and I'm going to do the same thing on Sky Vector. These are some of the real world tools that we will use later on during our flight training. There. Drawing that line there. And roughly, how many miles is that from Lake Norman to Asheville? 80-ish miles, right? Using your plotter there, good. So that is a cross country in the eyes of the FAA, so that's over 50 nautical miles. That's very good. And using here Sky Vector, we see exactly, yep, 81 miles, so that checks out. If we're using the wrong side of the plotter, we might get something around the 100 range, or maybe 95. That means that you're using the statute miles instead of the nautical miles, or you're using the wrong side. Anyways, that's why Sky Vector is a very good backup tool to just double check all your work. Okay, so we've written that down. Now let's find out what direction we need to be flying. So the way that we'll do that is we're going to use the plotter, and we're going to put the grommet on Lake Norman, and then we're going to line up the long edge of the plotter with our line to Asheville. We're going to rotate the plotter, the rotatable part of the plotter. We're going to make parallel to our MEF squares here. Those are our mean elevation figures. Those are those little boxes that also have the GPS for the latitude and longitude for each of those boxes. We're going to make that line parallel using those black arrows on the rotating part. And you've got that line sign parallel to Asheville. And what number do you read under the plotter? All right. So Aiden's got 263. Sky Vector says 271 though. I wonder what the problem is. If we go in here and look, we see that, oh, the true course is actually 263. All right, so that's actually correct. So Aiden, good job on that one. And you weren't deterred because SkyVector said something different. We know that we need some calculations here instead of just plugging in SkyVector and going. So 263 is going to be our first number. And if you'd like to follow at home, we've also got the flight plan form is right here. And so what we're going to do is slowly fill in this section of our flight plan form. So the winds, the headings, and then ultimately the course heading. All right. So I'm going to flip this over because we're not quite ready for the weight and balance side of things. Right now we're just working on the section side of things. We're going to come here, and our blocks, we've got true course, we've got wind correction angle, we've got a true heading, we've got a variation, we've got a magnetic heading, a deviation, and ultimately that comes to the course heading. Right? So we're going to do these right down here. We're going to calculate all this. Okay. All right, so we found our true course. Aiden, what was it? 263. Okay. Now we're going to need some information, right? The winds, which are over here. The winds, we have direction, velocity, and then under that we have temperature. Is that right? So how do we do that, Aiden? Yeah, winds and velocity. So we're going to pull up our trusty aviation weather. I like to get there through just Googling aviation winds aloft. And the first link will be the aviationweather.gov website. We can pull up the map of the entire US. That's not really useful for us for this. So we come down here to the winds and temperature data. We pull up the Miami area, and then we get this big block of information, right? For our flight today, Aiden, what are we near? I mean, we're Asheville to Lake Norman, so we need to find a station that is close to our area, right? Or close to our course, right? So is Key West pretty close? Jacksonville, Miami, Melbourne, Tampa, Tallahassee? Nope. I just keep going down this list. Wilmington, now we're starting to get kind of close. Raleigh, Columbia, Charleston, Florence. Oh, Greenville, Spartanburg. I know that's right down the road, right? So that's pretty close. That's probably our closest one. So all of this data, we're only going to use this line of data, right? And so we're probably, 172, we're going to stay below probably 12,000 feet for sure. Right? So we're just going to use these data blocks here. Okay? So let's say, for an example, let's use 6,000 feet. All right? So we have the winds as 2, 3, and Aiden, why don't you read those out so I can write them down here. 2, 3, okay, and that's in Celsius, right? So, and what's our standard temperature? 15. So later on when we do a performance, that's going to be pretty close, right? That's pretty close to standard. Okay, so 230, that's our heading, degrees, and that's in knots. Okay, that's good. And what is this 230 right here? Is that the way the wind is going to, or where the wind is coming from? Right, where the wind is coming from, exactly. So that way, the way that we think about it is if our course is 230, we have 100% of the wind in our face, right? Right. So that was for the 6,000, and we had the plus 12 Celsius. Okay. All right. So the next thing we need to know is the wind correction angle, right? How do we find the wind correction angle? Almost. You're jumping ahead. You want to use something that you don't want to use, which would be the E6P. So let's pull up the E6P. North Dakota has made a very nice electronic version of the E6P. So we have a slide rule side, which we probably don't need to use for this. We just need the wind side, right? Luckily, the directions are on top right here. Let's see here. So for ground speed, so if you ever get lost, you can always use the directions, right? But here, let's first plug in our wind. That is what we know, right? So the wind was reported as 230. So I'm going to turn this inside dial, the white dial, to 230. Okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this whole thing, the black and the round dial, up or down, so that the grommet is on something that I know, right? A known number. It can be any number. I can pick any number on here. But what I need to do is then chart that 29 knots. So if I start at a number, say like 100 down here, I'm going to make my mark at 29 or 129 knots. Does that make sense, Aiden? Does that make sense? And please stop me, and anyone online, please stop me as well if there's something that's not making sense. So we're at 100 here, and I'm going to add 10, 20, and 29 knots, and I'm going to put a mark there. For the folks at home, you may not see the red dot very well, but it is right there. Okay? So Aiden's making his mark as well. And now we know that our course is not 230. What was our true course? All right, so 263. So let's turn 263 on here. Okay? And we relatively know our airplane will go how fast? Let's say for round numbers, 110. Later on, we're going to do the exact calculation for the en route speed, but at least here we're getting a figure for how high do we want to fly en route up to Asheville. So now here's the tricky part. A lot of people get stumbled on this one. Is now I'm moving the red dot or the mark that you made on the clear side of the E6P. I'm going to move that mark down to the arc of the speed of our aircraft. Aiden said for R172, we're going to be 110. So this is the 110 arc right here. All right? So right now, all I've done is I've put the mark and then I've turned this. But what I need to now do is move this red dot down to the 110 arc. All right? Down, down, down we go. There's 110. All right? And so what that's saying is that our airplane doesn't care what the wind is. It will always be flying at that speed. So here the example is 110. Right? Under the grommet, here in the middle, is now our ground speed. Okay? So that ground speed now is showing here as what, Aiden? What do you see? Somewhere around 85. So our airplane is flying at 110, but our ground speed will be 85. Right? Today is not a very good day for flying to Asheville, right? For many reasons, but we'll find those out in just a second. Okay? So what we've done now is we've figured out what altitude do we want to fly at. Okay? In the real world, what we would do is we would do multiple calculations based on the 9,000, the 3,000, and any other altitude that we may want to choose for our cross-country flight. All right? Here we just did it for 6,000, and we have that math. Okay, so now we're going to plug in the wind correction angle, right? So the wind correction angle is read off of where that dot is according to the true index or the center line here. Right? So I see a 10-degree line or radial here. And then I see the red dot is just within about the 9 on the left-hand side. So visually, what that, or pictorially, what that looks like, if we're flying this way to Asheville on a heading of 263, the wind is coming from my left, and so therefore I'm going to have to turn to the left, right, to compensate for that wind. So visually, what that means is 263 was our heading, and we're going to subtract 9 degrees, right? So that's going to be our new course that we're going to try and do for the wind, right? So our wind correction angle is minus on this side, minus 9, right?
I got Phil.
You Phil? I'm Patrick.
Patrick, I was still earlier. Nobody downstairs.
If you just wait a little bit, yep, Phil will be right back.
Perfect, thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry about it.
Not a problem. So now we do this math on 263 and minus 9. What's that math? I'll help you with the first digit. 254. 254, okay? Good. All right, so 254 is going to be our true heading. But I have a few more blocks. I also have the course heading over here. Okay, so now variation. So Aiden, where do we find variation? Well, that's why you're here, right, Aiden? So that you'll find out. So we have two magnetic things we need to worry about. One is variation and one is deviation, right? So magnetic variation is something that the Earth does. That is the difference between true north and magnetic north, right? And if you've been hearing about magnetic north, has been moving or accelerating up towards the North Pole. And so scientists are worried about that. So the magnetic variation that we're looking for are going to be these red, magenta, dashed lines that all kind of go roughly north and south, at least here in North Carolina. So this line, wow, yeah, we can get down here to Greenville, but we can see, man, it gets pretty cluttered here in South Carolina, right? I can barely make out that red dashed line here. So let me follow it the other direction, because somewhere on that line is going to be that key piece of information that I'm looking for, which is here, 7 degrees west, right? So, and here's that saying that never really made sense to me. West is best, east is least. Have you heard that before, Aiden? Yeah, so I've been flying for 15 years, and I heard this, and it never made sense to me until a few months ago, where all of a sudden it became west is best, east is least. So that tells me if it's an easterly variation, I am subtracting because it's least. All right? Here we have west, so that means add. Okay? So we are going to do 7 degrees plus. Okay? Is that making sense here? And no questions online? Perfect. So 254 plus 7 is, I'll help you out with the 2 again. All right, 261. Now we have deviation, okay? And now that is customized for our airplane, right? So for 239 Sierra Papa, let's just as a rough example, let's say 261. I can't really see it in that picture, but if it says fly a heading of west, 270, you would fly a 265 head, okay? So what that says is I have to subtract 5 degrees. Does that make sense? 270 is what I want, but for that, I actually have to fly 265. And that could be air conditioning, something with the magnetism of the engine or the magnetos, or some sort of electrical interference that is causing that compass deviation. So I'm saying minus 5. Does that make sense? All right. Now, what is this math equal for course heading? I'll help you out with the 2 again. Okay. There you go. Now, is all this making sense? So our course heading is 256. Now this is just in general. This is just for one leg, one direction. This is all that we're doing. So what we're actually doing for Lake Norman to Asheville, we're going to take that chart that you've got, the flight plan chart, and let's put a couple of waypoints in here, okay? Because we don't want to fly for an hour or two on a given course, that 256, and just hope for the best. Okay, well, I should be at Asheville by now. Oh, I'm not. Now what? So let's look for obstacles. Let's look for things, waypoints, features on the ground that we can find along the way that are roughly 10 to 15 miles apart. Okay? So for us here at Lake Norman, when we take off from Lake Norman, typically on runway 32, we immediately come over the lake. So that's kind of tough. We can't use that as a waypoint, right? Then we pass over the steam station. Well, we can't really use that either. Again, we want something 10 or 15 miles away. Well, luckily, according to this line that we drew on our sectional, we're going to be right over the Little Mountain private airport, right? And if you see very, very close, that airport is going to be off our left side, and there is a grass strip called Laney's, which is also going to be on our left or southern side of the airport. All right? So why don't we make Little Mountain our first waypoint? Okay. Then there's a highway that I see here, right? And actually for part of the class Bravo shelf here for Charlotte, it follows that highway. I believe that highway is 321. Anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. I've been known to be wrong a time or two. And so crossing this highway 321, it looks like that should be another 10 or 15 miles there. And here's the other note that we should see here is that the town of Maiden is here. You see that, Aiden? Maiden, then the highway, and there are some power lines right here, just south of Newton. Right? See those? Well, I may just be crossing 321, but what I could use is that known area. There is a town to the north. There's a town that I should be crossing right over, and there are some power lines that intersect that highway, and I should be south of that intersection. Anything you can write down now on the ground will help you then when you're in the air. Hey, look, I'm flying over the intersection of those power lines in that highway. I'm slightly off course. And we'd like to catch that earlier rather than later. Similarly to some of our other VOR techniques, this is called bracketing, right? So we can find out, are we down here? Did we fly over to Lincolnton Airport? Or are we inbound into Hickory? I want to make sure I'm somewhere in between. I'm in that bracket. Okay? Our next waypoint, all of a sudden it kind of opens up here. There's not much terrain. There's the town of Kaiser, lovely, lovely folks down there in Kaiser. And then I've got a tower. Oh, look really close here, Aiden. On this line, I see a tower, and I see a bunch of shading right here, right? For the folks at home, I'm going to zoom in just a little tighter so we can really see this color that's going on. All right, so here's the amazing town of Kaiser, all right? And then I see a tower, and this is kind of greenish, the tint, and then I get a lot of beige and well, yeah, beigeish, right? Kind of a vanilla-looking color. So that means elevation. There's so much data on these charts. It's amazing. So this is a low elevation, and all of a sudden here is a higher elevation. I actually see 3,000 feet over here. I see a 2,000 here, all right? And I see a tower. So I'm going to fly south of that tower, so I know if I'm over that tower or to the north of that or over this 3,000-foot mountain or hill, I know I'm in the wrong spot. Again, bracketing to where I am. Now, if I fly over Kaiser, or if all of a sudden I'm following I-85 or Highway 74, I also know I'm way too far south. I-40 is up here past Hickory, so I want to be somewhere down here. Right? That's another really good waypoint. A lot of folks wonder, why can I not use these towers right here? I mean, the towers are everywhere, right? Any ideas why? Aiden? They are very hard to see. That's exactly right. Once you're above the tower, they blend in with the earth, right? And if you're under the tower, you're probably in the wrong spot. And if you can see that tower. Yeah, so pick a different one. So we've got this tower and the terrain feature. Next up, we've got the Rutherford County Airport. That's probably a good waypoint. Again, there, that's actually going to be, I'm not over the airport, but rather I'm basically a few miles north of it. So around here, I should be looking straight down the runway. Right? And then I can make another hash mark there. Now we get to Lake Lure, and we can't put baby in the corner, right? So we always have to remember about Lake Lure and all the history there. And so Lake Lure is a really good waypoint because it's a T or a cross shaped lake. And around or abutting that lake are some really nice looking cliffs, right? Some sheer granite cliffs, rock faces. So that's a pretty easy to spot waypoint as well. If we wanted to, and if our airplane was so equipped, ours are here at Great City, we could dial in a VOR, the Sugarloaf Mountain VOR to be exact, which is right next to Chimney Rock. So you can actually see the VOR, the bowling pin, from Chimney Rock, the state park. And that's there. We can dial that in and find out when we cross through a certain radial, be it the 0 radial, be it any of these other radials over here. And then we get into our last mountainous or hilly area before we get into the Asheville area. From this weekend, a couple of our ground school students actually suggested, why not change our route so it doesn't go over this high 4,200 foot obstacle, but rather head to the south and come in through Asheville there. Absolutely. Plan for whatever makes sense for you. The big picture is that you're taking a look out here and planning ahead before you get in the air. Okay? All right. So, Aiden, why don't you tell me, using your sectional and using your plotter, how far is our first waypoint, that little mountain airport? About 10 miles? All right. That's kind of what we were looking for, right? I'm going to, in Lake Norman, yep, sure enough. Sky Vector says 9 miles to Little Mountain. Okay, so what we want to do is then on our flight plan form, what we will want to do is our first waypoint will be right here. Right, we're going to plug in these checkpoints right here. And this distance is what you're going to write in for each leg. Now, 81, right, was your total distance. But for this first one, it's 10. So let's put 10 in that leg. And what is 81 minus 10? Yeah, so 71 is in the remaining. Okay. Now our ground speed, we still need to calculate that, but we'll write down the estimated here, and then in the airplane, we'll write down our times, and then once we've landed again, we can review our times versus our estimated. So we can literally see what our actual ground speed was versus our estimated. Okay? And then we'll also figure out our time en route to that waypoint. Right? So in 10 miles, how long should that take based on our ground speed? All right. Any questions so far? Cool. What I like about this form is you can also write some notes, and you can also put the different altitudes if you want. Right? So here under the class Bravo shelf, you may not immediately be able to climb the 6,000 feet. We can start at a 3,000. Once we get to this waypoint, then we will climb to the 6,000, 6,500 foot. Right? So, now, let us find our speeds. Okay, so this is the other side of our E6P. This is the kind of the more complicated side, if you will. And we always tell people, or I always tell our students, I don't know how to work the E6P. I have to teach myself every time before I can teach everyone else. So I try and start with something I know, something that is easy. Okay, so let's just think kind of big picture. If you're traveling 60 miles an hour, how long will it take you to travel 60 miles? 1 hour, right? Okay, so now let's change that slightly. If we are traveling 60 miles an hour and we are traveling 90 miles, how long will that take? Hour and a half. These are simple examples, but what that tells me is now I can apply that to the E6P. Okay, so this black arrow is our rate arrow. That is the most important on this side of the E6P. If we don't get the arrow correct, we will get everything else wrong. All right, so now let's think hour and a half for the 90 miles. But what about if we were traveling 90 miles an hour, how long would it take us to go 60 miles? About 45 minutes. Either way, it's less than an hour, right? Okay, so let's turn the rate, which here is our speed, to 90. Okay? And then we'll come over here to 60, and we can find out how many minutes it takes. And the reason why it's not 45 is because 90 is a third, right, or a half more than 60. So therefore, it's 40 instead of 45. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyways, if it doesn't make sense, we start with that simple example on the E6B, and then we can figure out, oh, okay, to go 60 miles here in distance, it will take us 40 minutes. Alternatively, if we're going 90 miles an hour, to travel 80 miles will take about 53 minutes. Okay? So here for our aircraft, we're pretending 110. Okay? So here's 110. And how many miles was it to Asheville? 81. So how many minutes should it take us to get up there? Yeah, around 44. We've got the arrow on 110. Here, we dropped to 0. We went to 81. And then on the inside, we've got 41, 2, 3, 4 right here. So, yeah, just over 44 minutes. Perfect. All right. So we know that our whole trip will take 44 minutes. And what about our little 10-mile excursion over to Little Mountain? How long should that take at this speed? $18? Okay. Well, so again, we've left this the same. Our speed is always going to be the same, so the 110. And for that previous example, we went on the outside ring and then jumped to the inside ring to find our time. So here we find 10, right? Then we jump to the inside, which says 5:5. Well, we know it's not 55 minutes because our whole trip is going to take 44. So just like here, we drop to 0. Here, we're going to move the decimal place, and we find 5.5 minutes. Okay? So from here to Little Mountain should take 5.5 minutes. And then you would do the same process. Let's say we're still traveling at 110 knots, and we've got a distance of, say, 20 miles. Should take us just under 11 minutes. Make sense? Which makes sense because 5.5 minutes times 2 is just around 11. Right? Any questions on that one? So now we figured out how to use the backside for times. What about for fuel burn? Well, here's the thing, Aiden. We don't know our fuel burn yet. We haven't gone through that in the POH, right? And if we're going to find fuel burn, we have to find our weight, right? Well, we know our altitude, right? So we said 6,000 feet. So our altitude is going to be 6,000. Okay. And of course, here we have to remember east versus west cardinal altitudes, right? It would make sense if you were traveling to the east that you would be at an even altitude plus 500 for a VFR flight, right? But we remember what the saying is, so it's the opposite of that. And so therefore the altitude going to the west is an even 1,000 plus 500. So we have to do 6,500 feet, right? Okay, so let's do a weight and balance now, right? And Aiden, you weigh, let's imagine 160 pounds, okay? I'm going to say I weigh 210 pounds. And let's see, the back seat, we're bringing lunch, right? Asheville's lovely. So let's bring 30 pounds of bags in the back. We're bringing fuel, and that is 6 pounds per gallon. And our aircraft can hold 53. So let's do 53, or let's do 50, just to make it simple. So 50 times 6 is how much? 300, right? Okay? So we can add up all of the weights, and then we'll multiply for the moments. Now, Aiden, we see here on our 172 that the pilots can be 34 inches to 46 inches on the weight and balance, right? On the moment or on the arm side. That's what each one of those little inch marks on the seat latch mean. And so where do you sit when you sit? You're kind of closer to the front, so you're 36 inches, okay? I'm kind of tall, so I'll slide kind of to the back side of it. So let's say I'm at the 44, okay? So let's do some calculations. Everyone at home, hopefully still following along, and we'll slide this over slightly so you can see it. Right? So, say here, let's find our total weight first. 1698 is our empty weight, 160 is our pilot, 210 is our instructor, 30 is our back seat, and 300 is our fuel. So our total weight is 2398, right? That's good because that's under our gross weight of 2550. You have to stay under that number there, right? And then let's find the moments for each one of these objects in the plane. We know the empty weight because we found that on our weight and balance, and that's available on our website for our aircraft. So 160 times 36, that is 5760. 210 times 44, 9240. 30 times 73 is 2190. And 300 times 48 is 1440. 1440. All that making sense? Now we have to add up all the moments. So 67,007.8 plus 5760 plus 92. Screw that one up. So 67.8 plus 5760 plus 9240 plus 2190 plus 14400. So I get a total of 98,597.8. Now I'm going to divide my total moment by my total weight, and that'll find our CG for our flight, which is 41.1. Okay, that makes sense? So the aircraft started at 39, And with all of our weight that we added, we've shifted back 2 inches. All right, just a little under 2 inches. So our takeoff weight from Lake Norman is 2398, and our CG is 41.1. Right? Okay, so we'll proceed on that weight, so 2398. All right. Oh, now last second, maybe we had a passenger with us, something like that. Luckily, Cessna, the charts that they put out are based at gross weight, so 2550. So we know that is worst case scenario, right? So for our takeoff, let's find our current weather at Lake Norman or nearby Lake Norman. We're going to add our textual weather ball here on Sky Vector. And Statesville is reporting 24 degrees Celsius. So at 24, that's somewhere in between 20 and 30. And our pressure altitude, we'll say, is around 1,000. Okay. So our ground roll at gross weight with flaps at 10 degrees and all these other conditions, you see our ground roll will be 1090, and our total to clear a 50-foot obstacle is 1850. Now 24 degrees Celsius is in between these two, so it's somewhere in between, and we can interpolate if we'd like, 1850 and 1990, and the ground roll would be between 1090 and 1170. Does all that make sense? All right. So now we know our takeoff here at Lake Norman. We'll be able to overcome gravity, and we'll be able to take off and not hit the trees at the end of the runway. And we'll be able to see that beautiful lake as soon as we're over the trees. Okay, so that's our takeoff. That's good. Okay, we'll scroll down here. That's short field performance. And then we're in cruise. Okay, and we selected 6,500 feet, right, for our cross country. Okay, good. So at 6,000 feet, what was our temperature? It was right around the standard, right? Yeah, it was 12, which is close to our standard here. And we find on this page in the POH, this is in the performance chapter, chapter 5, we find our pressure altitude 6,000. That's pretty close to our 6,500. So we're at a standard temperature. Okay. And let's see here. Do we want to be at 2650 RPM, 26, 2400, 2300 RPM? We typically like that 2400 RPM, right? So we're going to do 2400 RPM. We're going to come over here, and we find 57% brake horsepower. Okay, so 57%, 108 knots. So we were pretty close on that 110, weren't we? And we found, oh look, 8.2 gallons per hour is our fuel burn. Okay, so let's remember that. So 8.2 gallons per hour. I'm going to write this up here. 8.2 gallons per hour. Okay, and how long was our flight? $44 minutes. So let's find out how much fuel we're going to burn during our flight. Let's pull up the E6B. We put it to 110, but we actually found out it's going to be 108, right? And actually, this is our ground speed, isn't it? So what was our ground speed? What did we calculate our ground speed to be? 85. 85. Right? This is on the wind side here. Let's cancel that out. But yeah, so 85. So instead of putting the arrow at 110, which is our airspeed of the airplane, we're going to 85, which is our ground speed of the airplane. Okay? And it was 81 nautical miles, right? So if we're thinking big picture without the E6B, roughly the same distance and the same speed means it should take about 1 hour, right? Give or take. So sure enough, I'm going to 85 knots, 81 miles an hour, or 81 nautical miles, and we find out it's 57 minutes. So that means, okay, I'm somewhere in the ballpark, right? So 57 minutes. All right. Now we know that the full flight will take 57 minutes if we want to write that down on our flight plan form. And that's pretty close to an hour, right? Now for fuel burn, we can also use the backside of the E6B. What we're going to do is take this rate, and what was our fuel burn? 8.2, yep. So we're going to find 82, because remember here, we drop a zero, or move a zero, or move a decimal place. So here's 8, here's 9, 8.2 is right there, right? 57 minutes, so this arrow would be at 60 minutes, here's 55 minutes, 57, which means it's right around 7.7 gallons or so. Do you see that, Aiden? Do you agree? So conservatively, we would say 8 gallons, right? And that's pretty close. 8.2 gallons per hour for 57 minutes. I know I'm bald. We like to conservatively say 10 gallons an hour, and you wouldn't take off and plan a flight like that anyways, but we plan on that 10 gallons an hour. That way we make sure that in an hour you're going to have plenty of fuel. Okay, so here we've now burned 7.8, 7.7 gallons. So what we're going to do is 50 was our takeoff gallons, and now let's conservatively say 10 gallons is what we burned with taxi at Lake Norman, taxiing at Asheville, that kind of thing. So we're going to have 40 gallons when we land at Asheville, which means that this 300 is going to change, this 1440 is going to change, the total moment, and of course, all these other totals will also change. All right, let's get our trusty calculator back. And so for our new 40 gallons times 6 pounds per gallon, that's now 240 pounds. All right, so let's add up all that. So 1698 minus 160 minus 210 minus, oh, I'm sorry. I was subtracting 1698 plus 160 plus 210 plus 30 plus 240 equals 2338. Again, that's good because that's under 2550. And it's also good because it's under the takeoff weight, which means that we did the math right. Okay? And then we do the same thing with our moments. So 240 times 48 is 11520. We'll add up all of our moments. 67007.8 plus 5760 9240 plus 2190 plus 11520 equals 95717.8. Divided by 2338 gives us a new center of gravity of 40.9. Okay? So our landing weight is now 2338 with a center of gravity of 40.9. Does that make sense? So what that's showing us is that the center of gravity has moved forward, and the only thing we changed was the fuel. Okay? So if we started off with a rear CG, as we burn that fuel, it's moving now forward. Okay? Now, of course, we can get into all kinds of details about all these, but we're just using examples so that way we can study at home and do other examples as we see fit for us. Right? So then our next look is going to be our landing performance. We found out our takeoff performance, right? Now let's do our landing performance. Again, that's in the performance section of the POH, which is here on our website. short field landing. Okay? Now, short field, we do this because this is the worst case scenario, right? So this is saying the runway must at least be this long. Okay? So what is the current weather in Asheville? Let's go back to sky vector. We find our current temperature in Asheville is 13 degrees Celsius. That's pretty close to 10, I would say. And our pressure altitude, let's say it's around 1,000. Okay, so we're at 10 degrees Celsius here. The ground roll will be 585 feet, and the total to clear a 50-foot obstacle will be 1350. So we need to make sure that the Asheville runway is at least 1,350 feet long, right? Now, Aiden, you've got a couple of tools in front of you that are going to tell us how long the runway is. On the sectional, what do you see? Elevation, yep. That's right. And the runway is 7,000 feet long. That tells us that we'll be perfectly fine, right? Okay, awesome. So now we know that at least we can land at Asheville, right? We always want to check our no Tams. The great thing here on Sky Vector is we can also put in TFRs. We never know where the president or any other VIP issue is going to happen. So we can illustrate the TFRs, all right? We can also see radar and everything. Sky Vector is a fantastic tool for us to use. I don't see any TFRs in the area. We would always get an official weather briefing, but here we just want to do something quick and easy so that we can report it and show our students through the ground school. Okay, and then we come in here to Asheville. So we know that we can make our flight now. We've done our weight and balance, and we know that we're legal there. Let's take a look at the weight and balance. This is in our POH. This is page 6-16. And this is our envelope. This is what the weight and balance of our aircraft actually looks like. Okay? And you can see a couple of axes here. One is the CG location, which we've already calculated, and then our loaded weight of the airplane in Tams, which we've also already calculated. So we're going to enter for takeoff at 2398. That's pretty close to 2400. So we're somewhere on this line here. And we're at 41.1 inches, which is here. So we're going to come up here and cross. And we find that we're somewhat close to the front of our envelope, right? Relatively in the middle. We're not up here. That's also good. Right? We're around that 2550. So we're right here. Okay. And then for landing, we're going to say 2338. That'll be about here. And we're just under 41, so it'll be here. So graphically, what we've done is, now here's takeoff and here's our landing, all right? So we basically paralleled this. We haven't gone any more forward at that new weight. Does that make sense? So the feeling is going to be about the same in the go, all right? Now, unfortunately, not everyone has these charts. So the FAA private pilot written test, we use different charts. And for this is our takeoff performance. Takeoff? Yeah. Okay. And so this is figure 40 in the small red book that you would take for your private pilot written test. All right. And we're going to step through this really quick just so that you've seen an example of how to use this graph. So we did it by just looking it up in a chart. We found the 2550 pounds. We found the temperature, the pressure altitude, and all that. This is a different chart that has the same information. This is not for a Cessna 172. This is out of that written test. Okay? So we would start at the outside air temperature over here. Okay? So Asheville was what, 13 Celsius? So we're going to come in here, here's 10, here's 20, so somewhere around this red arrow. Our pressure altitude at Asheville, let's say is 1,000, but for this example, let's go to 2,000. Okay, so we come 13 up to this curve, which is the 2,000 curve, and then as soon as you hit a curve, you're going to go horizontally across the graph, as much as that makes sense. Okay, so we're hitting this curve, we're coming across, boom, we're horizontal over to the next reference line here, which is going to be our weight. Okay, so we basically come in at this this kind of bold blue line right here. The weight of our airplane for our Cessna 172 was over here, 2398. That's pretty close to 2400, right? I'd round that up. So we come in at this point, and here's the great thing. We are going to parallel these lines, because we are not on the line, we parallel the line coming down. Here was our entrance. We're paralleling the line to 2400. So here we started about halfway in between both lines at 2400. We're again going to be about halfway between the two lines. Okay? Again, once we've intersected that line, what do? We go horizontal, exactly. So we're at this line now. We're coming across to the next reference line. Okay? So I know I'm just above this blue line, 2 blocks, and under that next blue, bold blue line. Okay? Let's take a look at the wind component at Asheville. Asheville is currently a 35012 gusting 19. Here we could also use a crosswind component chart, also found in our POH, if that was not directly down the runway. Luckily here it's right down the runway at runway 35, so it's going to be 12 knots of wind. Okay, we started here, and we've got 12 knots of wind, which is, here's 10, so 12 is here. We come down this line parallel to the 12, and then again, straight across, that's right. So we're going to come straight across to the next reference point, okay? Now, our obstacle is, it's always the classic 50-foot obstacle. We always have a 50-foot obstacle. So we come across to here. If we didn't have an obstacle, also called our ground rule, right? We would come straight across. For this aircraft, it would be somewhere around 600 feet, okay? But we have always an obstacle. So we come up that line, parallel to this line, and we find it's 1,000 feet. So our ground roll is 600 feet, and to clear a 50-foot obstacle, we need another 400 feet. Does that make sense? Essentially, the airplane is on the runway for 600 feet. You rotate, you're going airborne, and to clear a 50-foot obstacle, I need another 400 feet to get above. Right? At Asheville, this is not an issue typically for our size airplanes. Lake Norman, depending on the heat and the day and the winds, it may be something that we have to take a look at. That's why this is a real world problem for some folks. And we definitely want to run through it, especially here at Lake Norman. Now, of course, everything here in the figure that is in this handbook, it gives you different conditions. And here's an example. Here are the conditions, right? This one has retractable gear and cowl flaps. And then at that specific weight, you have to make sure that you're taking off at the appropriate time. If you don't, if you proceed a little bit further beyond that speed, it's going to lengthen that runway requirement. Okay, any questions on that, Abe? Any questions at home? Everything's looking good? Okay, so now we've done weight and balance, takeoff, landing. We've done en route performance. We've done landing performance. Okay? We've also done our E6B. We've done the weight and balance here. We're back to the flight plan form. And let's see, we've done the landing performance. We've done the wings aloft. That's all good. Okay? Now we're knowing a little bit more about our flight, right? But real world, we're going to want to know something about our destination. who do we talk to en route? Who do we talk to when we're about to land at Asheville? Where are we parking? Asheville's a big airport. We probably just can't taxi off the side and kind of have a picnic on the grass, right? Not like here at Lake Norman. So we use a website called AirNav. Similarly, Aiden, you've got a green book. That's called our chart supplement, right? And so that's got all the information about all the airports. The AirNav is a very easy to use website version of that. And of course, the FAA also publishes the green chart supplement book on their website as well for all that data. So here, let's go through really quick. This is called the Asheville Regional Airport, and it's located in Asheville, North Carolina. The identifier is KABL. Here are the GPS coordinates, or the Latin long. Here's the elevation, and any of that other information that we want to know about Asheville, and where it's located in relation to the city. Okay? We're going to proceed on down. Airport operations. It is open to the public. It has a wind indicator, and it also has a tower with light, the beacon, right? It is white and green. What does white and green mean, Nate?
Open air.
Yep, it's a civilian use land airport. If it was white green, that would be a military airport. Right? Just a fun fact, Charleston Air Force Base is an Air Force base, and so it is white, green, even though civilians are allowed to use that airport. Also down here, we would have airport communications. So we would have our CTAF, our Unicom, ATIS. Oh, look, I don't even have to be in the airplane. I can actually call and hear what the weather is from that automated surface observation station. We have our approach frequencies here, which we would also find on our sectional, like in these magenta and white boxes. Contact Asheville approach within 20 miles, depending on which side of the airport you're coming from. Communications are unavailable below 6,000 feet in certain areas and on certain frequencies in certain areas, depending on where you are from the airport. And of course, why? Because of all that terrain that's up there, right? Any questions? AirNav is very, very useful because it also has an airport diagram. Well, that's going to help us because we need to know where to go, right? We pull up the airport diagram and we get to see, oh, look, here's that 7,000-foot runway that we already saw. That's good. And we see, oh, okay, here's a south FBO ramp and a north FBO ramp. Today we're landing on runway 35 because the wind was 350, gusting 19. So we're going to land here. And here's the big stickler. We have 3 taxiways. We're probably not going to make this turn off. So we can plan for at least the middle or the end turn off the runway, right? When there's congestion or a lot of traffic, we may accidentally spend a lot of time, like 3,000 feet of time, on the runway if we miss one of these taxiways. So if there's traffic behind us, they may have to go around. That's another great reason to look at the airport diagram to plan where can we do a turn. We see that the future runway is going to have some high-speed turn-off here, which will be really useful if we were in, say, a faster airport. So now we know the general location of the north ramp, or the FBO ramps, rather, and we can kind of say, okay, well, there's a tower beacon down here, there's an FBO here. That really helps me sort of plan ahead. Now let me go back to AirNav and continue. Okay, we do have fuel if needed. We have parking, we have hangars and tie downs. We do have some aircraft maintenance. If we had oxygen on board, we could also get oxygen. We have our runway information here, and this is the same information that you would find in the chart supplement. We find out who owns the airport and who manages it, and some other information about the airfield, like airplanes and helicopters that are based there. Then additional remarks, if there's any other remarks. Here, of course, we have flocks of migratory birds on and in the vicinity of the airport. We have any instrument approaches, if we're so inclined to do an instrument approach. And then down here, we get to see who our FBO and our fuel provider are. So here we see its signature flight support, and we can find out the current fuel price. Okay? And if we needed to, we could call them, and their phone number is right here. All right. We also like, so we found all this information. Now I think we can make our flight, right? Do you want to make our flight today, Aiden? Probably not, right? The weather doesn't look like it's a great time to go flying in the mountains, especially with those gusts. I don't like the bumps. But we do use some other tools, or we have some other tools available, like the C-172 Performance. At pohperformance.com, we found a very useful website where we can plug in weights, what departure, en route, and our destination, and this will all graphically show us what we just did, right? We've gone through this in excruciating detail, but later on, we use these much easier to use tools, right? Any other questions while we're here, Aiden? We've been through this. It's just been over an hour. Any questions online? We've got nothing? All right, fantastic. So if everyone liked this, make sure that you hit the like or the subscribe button there on, or follow on Facebook. And this is kind of just giving you an overview of what we would do during a ground school final project. This is something that our students would then be able to do, and it's a great culmination to the entire weekend course that they took. If you guys don't have any other questions, we'll see you next time here at Race City Flight Operations. Thanks for tuning in.